The winter of 1887 rolled across Montana like a living beast, swallowing everything in its path. The wind howled across the high plains, lifting walls of snow that blurred the horizon into a seamless white void. Wagons vanished, cattle herds disappeared, and families who thought themselves hardened by frontier life were caught unprepared. They whispered that this storm was God's judgment, a test no man or woman was meant to endure. Beside a fractured wagon tilted in the drifts, Claraara Mallister crouched low, clutching her twin sons against her breast. 10 months old, William. And Wyatt whimpered with the weak, strained cries of infants who had already spent too many hours exposed to the cold. The tattered wool blanket she wrapped around them offered little protection. Their cheeks were red and raw, their breath short puffs of steam against her skin. Claraara rocked them gently, her body shielding them as best she could, her lips cracked from prayer whispered again and again. "Please, Lord, not them. Take me if you must, but let my boys live." Her husband, James, had been gone only days, taken not by the storm, but by the fever that had gripped him in the night. Alone, miles from the nearest ranch, Claraara had done the unthinkable. Wrapped his body in canvas and laid him in the snow. She could not bury him, not in the frozen ground. The wolves would come soon enough. Her tears froze against her face as she forced herself not to look back. The wagon wheel had broken before the fever struck. Now the cart leaned like a dying beast, its contents scattered and half-buried. A chest of baby clothes protruded from the snow. A tin of condensed milk rattled empty. Her husband's tools lay rusting in ice. Their dream of free land near the Milk River had crumbled into a graveyard of frost. The storm thickened, blotting out even the faint trail she had followed. Hours or minutes, it was impossible to know. Her body was numb, her breaths shallow, her vision swimming with black spots. Claraara pressed the boys tighter, whispering. An old lullaby her mother once sang in Kentucky. The sound barely carried over the banshee wind. Her knees buckled, and she slumped beside the broken wheel, the snow creeping higher over her boots. Darkness closed in. Her final thought lingered. With the strength of a mother's prayer, if only one of us survives, let it be them. The plains stretched wide and empty beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds. Caleb Thunderwood leaned low in the saddle, his mare Isadora trudging through knee-deep drifts. He had no business being out in weather like this. Only a fool or a desperate man dared travel Montana's high plains in the dead of a blizzard. But Caleb was both. A satchel lashed to his saddle carried more weight than paper. It was his one chance at clearing debts, maybe even staking a claim of his own. Each gust stung like glass across his face, but Caleb pressed on. A Cherokee mother had taught him to respect nature's fury, and a Scottish father had taught him to stand against it when there was no other choice. He'd spent years drifting, ranch hand, trail driver, gambler, sometimes gun for hire, and he had seen his share of storms. Yet something in this one felt different, almost alive, as if the wind itself whispered that someone's fate hung in the balance. He almost missed the wagon. Half buried, leaning sideways, it looked like another snowbank, until Isadora shied from it. Caleb pulled the reins, squinting through the gale. He saw the wheel jutting out, broken and frozen stiff. Scattered belongings poked through the snow, a rusted kettle, a child's mitten, a chest cracked open with fabric stiff as ice. His gut tightened. He knew what this meant. Somewhere nearby, death waited. Sliding off his horse, he trudged forward, boots sinking deep. "Hello," he called, voice swallowed by the storm. Silence answered. Then, barely audible, the faintest whimper. He spun, heart pounding, following the sound. Behind the wagon, half buried against the wheel, lay a woman. Her skin was white as the snow, lips tinged blue, eyes closed. In her arms, 2 small bundles stirred weakly, their faint cries fighting to be heard above the wind. Caleb dropped to his knees. Good Lord. He stripped off his heavy duster coat and wrapped it around the trio, pressing his fingers to the woman's neck. A pulse, weak, but there. He uncorked his flask, tilting a few drops of whiskey past her lips. She moaned faintly, still trapped between life and death. The babies whimpered louder, alive but slipping fast. Caleb swore under his breath. 5 miles south, he knew, sat a small homestead run by Angus O'Connell. 5 miles in this storm. Might as well be 50. But leaving them was no choice at all. He lifted the woman, clutching the infants between them, and murmured, "Hold on, ma'am. Just a little longer." Then he mounted Isadora, wrapped them tight, and turned into the storm. The storm clawed at them every step of the way. Caleb leaned low, shielding the fragile bundle of woman and children beneath his coat. His mare stumbled more than once, hooves sliding on hidden ice, but the stubborn animal pushed on. Caleb whispered steady words into her ear, promising warmth just ahead, though he wasn't certain himself. At last, a faint orange glow cut the curtain of snow, a lantern swinging by the door of a cabin. Relief surged through him. He hollered over the gale, and a broad-shouldered figure stepped into the doorway, beard frosted white. Angus O'Connell. Behind him, his wife Elsie clutched her apron, eyes widening at the sight of Caleb's burden. "They'll freeze!" Caleb barked as he dismounted, easing the unconscious woman and infants into Angus's arms. Within moments, they were inside, stripped of sodden clothing, wrapped in quilts, and set close to the fire. Elsie rubbed the baby's tiny hands, coaxing warmth back into their bodies, while Angus poured broth and pressed Caleb to drink. But Caleb's eyes never left the cot where the widow lay. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the crackle of firewood and the whimpering of the children. Caleb paced, stepping out to tend his horse, then back again. He wasn't a man who prayed often, yet tonight he found himself whispering words he barely remembered from childhood. Near dawn, the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered and she gasped, startled by the unfamiliar walls. Then she saw the twins, safe in Elsie's arms, and a sob broke free. She tried to rise but collapsed, too weak. Elsie hurried to her side, pressing broth into trembling hands. "What's your name, dear?" Elsie asked gently. Her lips quivered. Claraara Mallister. And these are my boys, William and Wyatt." The sound of their names drew Caleb closer. He tugged his hat from his head, kneeling. "You're safe now, Mrs. Mallister. I found your wagon. I'm sorry. Your husband—" He stopped, eyes full of regret. He didn't make it. Claraara closed her eyes, her face tightening with grief she already knew. A widow, alone with 2 infants. She whispered, "Thank you for saving us." Caleb shifted, uncomfortable beneath her gratitude. "Don't thank me. Just rest. You'll need your strength." The blizzard raged outside, but within those cabin walls, warmth kindled, a fragile beginning of trust, born from survival's edge. Days blurred into one another inside the O'Connell's cabin. The storm refused to break, rattling shutters and burying the corral fence under mountains of snow. Claraara slowly regained her strength, though grief clung to her like a shadow. She would rise to tend her twins, then crumble when their cries reminded her of James's absence. More than once Elsie caught her staring into the fire, lips moving in silent prayer, tears streaking her cheeks. Caleb busied himself with chores, splitting wood and hauling water, but his gaze often strayed to the widow by the hearth. He'd seen many women on the frontier, saloon girls hardened by survival, settlers' wives beaten down by drought and loss. Yet something in Claraara's eyes, fragile but unyielding, moved him. It stirred parts of himself he thought long buried beneath dust and gunsmoke. One afternoon, as the wind shrieked outside, Claraara insisted on returning to the wagon site. "He deserves a grave," she whispered, clutching Caleb's sleeve. James shouldn't be left to wolves. Caleb hesitated, but her resolve left no room for refusal. Angus lent them a shovel, and together they rode out into the brittle cold. The wagon leaned where Caleb had found it, snow covering James's form beneath the canvas. Claraara slid from the saddle, knees sinking into the drifts as she pressed, her forehead to the frozen cloth. "I'm so sorry," she wept. "I couldn't save you." Caleb dug while she grieved, hacking at the iron-hard ground until a shallow grave took shape. When it was done, Claraara tucked a scrap of James's shirt beneath a stone marker and whispered a final prayer. Her sobs froze into crystals on her lashes, but when she stood, there was a strange steadiness in her frame, as though facing death had given her strength to face life again. Back at the cabin, however, the trial was not yet over. Word spread that a stranger had brought a widow and 2 babes into Angus's home. By the 3rd day, a knock shook the door. A man named Eckhart stepped inside, tall, sneering, flanked by 2 rough companions. "We can't have every beggar crowding Fort Benton," he spat, eyes cutting toward Claraara. "Women with brats drain more than they give." Caleb rose slowly from the table, hand hovering near his revolver. "Careful with your words," he said, voice low. The air crackled with tension. Claraara clutched her children close, her heart pounding. The storm outside had not relented, and now another kind of storm gathered inside. The O'Connells' cabin grew tense after Eckhart's visit. Though Angus had shoved him and his men back into the snow with a barked threat of shotguns, the warning lingered. "That one's poison," Angus muttered. "He'll stir trouble where none belongs." Claraara said nothing, but the way she clutched her boys tighter each night told Caleb all he needed to know. Fear had seeped into her bones. When the blizzard finally relented, Caleb saddled Isadora and announced he was riding into Fort Benton. "Need to see if there's work. Need coin if you and the boys are to survive." Claraara's lips parted, as though she wished to protest, but she swallowed the words. He tipped his hat, gaze lingering longer than it should, then rode into the fading snowlight. Fort Benton was no refuge. At the boarding house, Caleb found rooms scarce and costly, the town muttering about shortages. Eckhart was already poisoning ears with his talk of parasites and strays. When Claraara arrived days later under Caleb's escort, carrying the twins swaddled in patched blankets, stares followed her through the streets. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men sneered, and whispers hissed like wind through grass. That night at Mrs. Puitt's boarding house, Claraara overheard Eckhart below, his voice rising like a serpent's hiss. "She don't belong here." 2 mouths, no husband, no coin, nothing but trouble. Fear twisted inside her. She pressed her cheek to Wyatt's small head, listening to his tiny breaths. For a moment she nearly believed the cruel words. But Caleb's return, his presence, like a wall between her and the world, snapped her back. "Don't let him break you," he murmured. "He feeds on weakness, and you're stronger than you know." Their bond deepened in that crucible. Caleb defended her in public, standing between Eckhart's venom and the widow's fragile dignity. In private, Claraara tended his hands, cracked. From chopping wood, her gratitude unspoken, but visible in every gentle touch. Then came the night of violence. They were woken by pounding at the door. Mrs. Puitt shouted from downstairs. Eckhart had returned, this time with cronies and threats sharper than words. Caleb stepped into the hall, revolver at his hip, his voice iron. "You'll not lay a hand on her, nor those children." The outlaws hesitated, seeing the fire in his stance. The twins stirred, whimpering as Claraara rose behind him, rifle clutched in trembling hands. The air bristled. One wrong move, and blood would paint the boarding house walls. The confrontation at the boarding house ended without bullets, but the danger did not vanish. Eckhart slunk back into the night, spitting promises of revenge. Mrs. Puett urged Claraara and Caleb to leave before the law, or worse, was twisted against them. With nowhere else to go, Caleb struck a bargain with an aging rancher named Jeremiah Tolbert. Drive a small herd south to sheltered grazing and earn enough coin to start fresh. It was perilous work, especially with Claraara riding along. She insisted, refusing to be left behind. "I won't hide while you bleed for us," she told Caleb, her voice low but steady. He saw the fire in her eyes and knew better than to argue. With the twins left in Mrs. Puett's care for a short while, they rode out together into a brittle dawn. The drive was grueling. Bitter wind cut their faces raw, cattle spooked at shadows, and wolves circled the edges of the herd. Caleb guided Isadora with practiced calm, while Claraara, wrapped in borrowed wool, clung behind him. At night, she huddled by the fire, fingers numb, whispering prayers for her sons. Caleb whittled scraps of wood into toys to distract her, a tenderness he tried to mask beneath stoic silence. But the test came with steel and smoke. At dawn on the third day, shots cracked across the ridge. Rustlers descended, faces hidden by scarves, rifles flashing. Cattle bawled and scattered. Caleb shoved Claraara behind a log, firing his Colt with deadly precision. A young ranch hand, Billy Carver, shouted warnings as bullets hissed past. Claraara's hands shook as she clutched the spare revolver Caleb had given her. One rustler charged close, gun raised. Claraara squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it startled the man, buying Caleb a heartbeat to put him down. Her breath came ragged, ears ringing, but in that moment she realized something fierce. She was no longer just surviving, she was fighting. When the smoke cleared, the rustlers fled, leaving one wounded and the cattle half scattered. Billy bled from a grazing wound, and Tolbert cursed his broken wagon wheel. But they lived. Claraara trembled, tears stinging her eyes, until Caleb caught her hands. "You did fine," he said softly. "Braver than half the men I've ridden with." By the time they reached the sheltered valley, weary and battered, Claraara knew something unspoken had taken root. Not obligation, not survival alone, but a bond tempered in fire, forged to last. When the cattle were delivered and coin exchanged, Caleb and Claraara wasted no time returning to Fort Benton. Her arms ached to hold the twins again, and Caleb's heart had grown restless, uneasy, until the family was whole. Yet the town welcomed them not with warmth, but with whispers. Eckhart had spread poison in their absence, accusing Caleb of theft, waving papers that claimed the law stood behind him. That night, as they gathered the twins from Father Lyons's care, the priest urged them to flee. The truth matters little. When men with influence decide guilt, he warned. Caleb gritted his teeth, ready to stand and fight, but Claraara clutched his arm. "Not here," she whispered. "Not with our sons." And so, beneath the cover of darkness, they rode west. Each mile carried them further from Eckhart's reach, and closer to something Claraara scarcely dared to believe in, a future. Their path led to the modest ranch of Robert "Bucky" Daniels, an old friend of Angus O'Connell. Bucky welcomed them with open hands and an open heart. In exchange for labor, he offered them a place, if not yet a home. The weeks that followed were a season of healing. Caleb mended fences, taught the twins to giggle at the sight of horses, and bore the weight of work with a steadiness Claraara had come to trust. She cooked and sewed alongside Bucky's house hands, her laughter, tentative at first, blossoming in the warmth of community. Each night, as the firelight flickered, she watched Caleb's silhouette, broad, patient, enduring, and her heart ached with something new, hope. One spring evening, beneath budding cottonwoods, Caleb took her hand. From his pocket, he drew a simple copper ring. His voice shook. "It isn't much, Claraara, but it's all I have. I can't promise riches or peace. Only that I'll fight. For you and your boys till my last breath. Will you be my wife?" Tears blurred her vision. For a moment, guilt twisted. James's memory, the journey that had begun with his death. But when she looked at Caleb, she saw not replacement, but redemption. She saw a man who had carried her from death's door and given her sons a father's devotion. Yes, she whispered. Yes, their wedding was small, Bucky officiating, ranch hands as witnesses, but to Claraara it was grander than any ballroom. The twins gurgled in her arms as vows were spoken, laughter and tears mingling beneath the endless western sky. Years later, as the ranch thrived and her boys grew tall, Claraara would recall that blizzard. She had been left to die, yet from that crucible rose a life she never dreamed possible. Love, family, and legacy, all born from the snow carried into the sun. Claraara Mallister's journey from despair to redemption is a testament to the unyielding spirit of the frontier. Left to freeze with her twins in the snow, she found not only survival in Caleb Thunderwood's arms, but the courage to embrace love again. Together they forged a family, weathered storms, and built a legacy that endures beyond hardship. If Claraara's story touched your heart, don't let it fade like snow on the prairie. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, and leave us your thoughts. We read every word. Subscribe to join us for more true-to-life Wild West tales of resilience, redemption, and love. Your support keeps these frontier stories alive.